You're listening to the hashtag STRask podcast with Amy Hall and Greg Kokel. Welcome.
Hey, Amy.
Hey, Greg. Okay, this first question comes from Andrew. Would you please clarify your assertion that whenever you add any adjective to the word justice, you corrupt it? I love the aphorism, and I think rhetorically it has great explanatory power. I just can't quite succinctly explain why this is true.
Well, it's an observation. It isn't a grammatical rule. Justice is justice. Okay, certain things are due people, and the word justice captures the notion of what is appropriately due people. Justice is when you give people their due. Now, that may be something pleasant or affirmative, or it may be something unpleasant like punishment. Justice works both directions. It's giving people their due, what is appropriate. It is like rights are a just claim to something. If you say I have a right to something, then you are due that thing in virtue of justice, if in fact it is something you're actually due. I mean, nowadays people make up rights claims all the time. But the observation is when adjectives are added to it, it takes just the word justice and it distorts it. It politicizes it. So you might have social justice, okay? Then that means this is a Marxist notion that entails that people are poor because they've been oppressed. So poverty is an example of oppression. Now, I say that's Marxist because in a non-Marxist understanding of economy, it is not oppressive because people don't have money. But in the Marxist view, the poor are oppressed by the rich, and it just in virtue of the fact that they don't control the means of production, etc. They're the ones who are working for they're the working class that's working for the capitalist, and so the capitalist is making a profit off of them. And if they're poor, it's because somebody took money that belongs to them. All right, but the Mosaic Law says, "Do not favor the poor in judgment, but act justly." Okay? So justice means to give what is due. Okay? The Bible doesn't have any sense that if a person is poor, that is in virtue of oppression. It does say to protect the poor from oppression because the poor, being poor, are easily oppressed. But their poverty isn't an example of oppression. So I just use that as one example, that when you add these adjectives to the word justice, you're really importing some kind of social / political notion that may end up subverting real justice in the process, okay? And so now we have reproductive justice. What does that mean? That means the liberty to kill your unborn children. Is that just? No. So the word reproductive added to the phrase justice has now perverted justice, but it makes it sound like it's an act of justice. So this is rhetorical manipulation. And as a generalization, and it's not from me, I think I heard it first from Dennis Prager. As a generalization, whenever you add an adjective to justice, what you're doing is you're perverting it, distorting it by importing some kind of other element that politicizes the notion. Justice is a word that works just fine all by itself. If somebody is being treated unjustly in virtue of racism, then justice is violated and justice should be restored. Okay, you add racial justice to it, there's a whole bunch of other baggage that comes with it that may not turn out to be just at all. And so that's the reason for the generalization.
I think what's happening here is when you see the word justice combined with another word, as you say, Greg, that signals that justice is being used rhetorically, as you said. I think that's the simple way to look at it. It's not that adding a word changes it. It's that usually if somebody's adding a word, that signals that they're using the word justice rhetorically. And how they're using it is to mean something I like or something I think we should do. And so what they're doing is they're redefining the word to mean things that are good or things that I like. And they're using the word that has connotations to us as a society, since we have this long history of the word justice, and it has good connotations. And then they attach it to another word, and then suddenly we think it kind of baptizes their policy with these good connotations.
Excellent way of putting it.
So that's the problem. Now, the biggest problem with redefining the word justice from being, say, what you're owed, what you've earned, that sort of thing, whether good or bad, what is due. The problem with redefining that, especially when I think in terms of charity, so when it comes to like social justice and the idea of giving to the poor, which is a good thing and something God commands us to do, and it's something we should desire and we should take part in. But is it justice? That's the question. And my problem with saying that is an example of justice is that we lose the meaning of justice, as you said, Greg. Now justice
and you also lose the meaning of charity.
And that's exactly my point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. That's exactly my point. I'm glad you're following along here, because the problem is once we lose justice, not only do we lose charity, but we lose the gospel. Because if suddenly you don't understand the idea of what you're owed, and suddenly you think, well, if I need something, I'm owed that thing. Justice provides me with that thing. Well, how will the gospel make sense in that world? If it's just for God to give us grace because we need it, then where's the gospel? It's gone.
It's not grace.
It's not grace anymore.
It's obligatory.
So I think it's going to cause all sorts of confusion among Christians. I think it already is causing a lot of confusion, and I think it's going to get worse.
It is principally a tool of manipulation, I think, to take foreign notions that are completely foreign to the concept of justice, and use justice, as you pointed out, as a connotation word to ennoble this new idea they have. You use the word baptized. Perfect. And this happens all the time. I mean, you go back to the Third Reich and you have the final solution. What's wrong with solutions? In fact, let's get a final solution. So whatever problem that we're trying to solve, we've now solved it for good. But of course, that's a euphemism for the destruction of every Jew in Europe. Now, they didn't succeed. They only killed 6 million of them, and 6 million others, as it turned out. This is not war dead. These are just executions. But the notion becomes palatable because the way language is used. Joseph Goebbels was the head of propaganda, and he was very, very clever how he used it. Now, some people resist any connection of anything now with the Third Reich. And they said, well, I know when somebody raises the Third Reich or Hitler, they're losing the argument or they've lost the argument. Wake up. History repeats itself, and those who don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it, one once said. We see these patterns in totalitarian governments, and it's not just the Third Reich, but it's also the Soviet Union, it's also Cambodia under the Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, and every other place where totalitarianism reigns. They manipulate language, and we better understand how that happens, or we're going to be victims of it, and that is what's happening here.
As Christians, we need to respect language and the meaning of language. After all, God has communicated to us with words. That's how he has communicated himself to us. And words are a tool for understanding truth. Mm-hmm. And so as Christians, we need to be very careful with how we use words and to avoid euphemisms, to avoid changing definitions of words all the time, because that's how you get a relativistic understanding of language is how you manipulate people, as you said, Greg. And unfortunately, in a relativistic society that doesn't value truth, we're in all sorts of dangers. So as Christians, this is something we need to be really careful about.
On the ambassador's creed, which I thought I had a copy here somewhere, but it's in the back of the tactics book, and there is a point there about a good ambassador is careful how he uses language, and he does not use empty rhetoric to make his points. By the way, we don't need that because we have good arguments. So we don't need to be manipulative in the way we talk in order to get to make our point well.